Bert! Get him! Yeah! Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. All right, everybody, it's the 17th of December. I got a cold or a head cold or I don't know. I got SNARS, MARS, VARS. Maybe I took a COVID test. I didn't think I had COVID, but my wife made me take the test. Anyway, I think I know where I got my cold from, but I'm not complaining because last Sunday and Monday I was part of the Meat Eater Live Tour. And, with meeting all the people and traveling and being in the auditoriums and all that stuff, I'm sure some person that didn't intend to get me sick got me sick, but I'm not going to complain because I met so many people in Kalamazoo and in Detroit. I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for the handshakes, for the hugs, and for all the beers. Oh, my God. I couldn't turn around without somebody handing me one, buying me one in a bar, or flagging me down on the street. It was incredible. So I guess a cold is worth the price to pay. So thank you for everybody that I ran into on Sunday and Monday. It was great to see you, great to talk to you. And other than that one of you who gave me this cold, I would do it again in a heartbeat. I'm looking at my whiteboard here and like, okay, how do I get through these sponsors? And I'm thinking about, Onyx, the title sponsor of this show, right? Like, who makes a better mapping system to go hunting, fishing, hiking, kayaking? It doesn't matter what you want to do in the outdoors. Who's got more layers to do all these things? Who's got a better system than Onyx, right? The answer is nobody. And then I look at Gunner Kennels. Who makes a better kennel than Gunner Kennels? When it comes to safety, when it comes to security, when it comes to anything, who makes a better kennel? Nobody, right? Then I look at Pike Gear, technical clothing for the upland hunter. Who makes a better lineup of gear for the bird hunter out there? Nobody. Boss Shot Shells, when it comes to non-tox ammunition, their copper-plated bismuth can't be beat. So who makes better non-tox than Boss? Nobody. Garmin, when it comes to tracking and training your dog with electronic equipment, who, I ask, makes better equipment for tracking and training your dog than Garmin? Nobody. When it comes to purchasing your equipment like Garmin or leashes or collars or whatever, who gives you better customer service than W Supply? Who, I say? I sound like a hoot owl. Who? Nobody. When it comes to everything but the meat, you think of one word, Waltons. Why? Because they have literally everything but the meat to help your wild game kitchen come off like a 5-star Michelin restaurant, right? Who's got more for your meat than Waltons? Nobody. When it comes to shotguns, I don't care if it's 13-inch length of pulls to extended tube magazines. Who's got more models of shotguns in this country than Mossberg & Son? Who? There I go, sound like an owl again. Well, the answer is nobody. When it comes to camping, living in your truck on a camper with a cap that turns into a, well, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about my 4-wheel camper Model M. Who makes anything close to this for the traveling wing shooter? The answer is nobody. Canine Athlete and Wilderness Athlete, supplements for you and your dog. This company, they know we're inseparable. Who makes better products for you and your dog than Canine Athlete? Nobody. Who makes better dog food for your food? Who makes better dog food for your dog than Purina Pro Plan? Nobody. Nobody's been at it as long. Nobody's been at it as professional. And nobody has sponsored as many different dog organizations and conservation organizations as Purina has. So my question is, what dog food company does more than Purina? Nobody. And what online training system for your dog will get you to the goal line better and quicker and more thorough than the Upland Institute? Come on. What's the answer? Nobody. There. Now, I also want to thank my Patreon patrons. They are the backbone. All these sponsors are contractual sponsors that I believe in every one of their products, and I use and I own every one of their products. But my Patreon patrons are my number one oldest sponsor. They are the people that listen to this show and give a few dollars to listen to the show and be part of either the Zoom rooms or the discounts or extra content or the ability to reach out to me. I mean, I don't say that you can talk to me every week for a half an hour, but there isn't a Patreon patron that doesn't have my phone number if they need it. It's on the page. It's on my emails to them. You can get a hold of me if you've got questions, if you've got anything. It's a community of listeners that I literally could not survive without, and I can't thank you all enough for being Patreon patrons. So there. Oh, you know what else? Oh, one other thing. Who makes the best Mexican lager in the United States? Watermark Brewery. Yeah, nobody makes better Mexican. Actually, nobody makes better beer. I just, on my way down to Kalamazoo last Sunday, I stopped and I saw my friend Justin. I should say my new friend Justin. We were actually hunting together, not on the same group, but we were hunting at the same time, the same week in South Dakota. And we shared a few laughs and a few beers down there. And I told him, I said, next time I go through Stevensville, Michigan, if you're there, I want to stop in, I want a plant tour, and I want to drink another one of those bodega lagers. And he accommodated me. And so I want to thank Justin for, hosting me for a little bit on Sunday at noon. Well, we watched the Bears, and I think it was, I don't follow football. I think it was the Bears and Lions. It was a big deal to the people there. But I'll tell you what, if you are ever in Southwest Michigan, especially in the summertime, dog-friendly, bring your own food in. You can do whatever you want. Watermark Brewery, and I'm telling you what, their beer. Now, I used to be just a Miller Lite drinker, like all the time. To my friends and family, like, come on, Ron, drink something with flavor. Well, I have learned to drink a lot of better beers in the last few years. I'm telling you what, I wish I could find it in every store. Their Bodega Mexican Lager, oh, my God. I could almost drive there tonight, except I've got this cold, and it's 2 hours away. Otherwise, hey, listen, that was only 7 minutes and 38 seconds. That wasn't bad for my typical. Thanks to everybody. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, sponsors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you enjoy this episode. It was different. I don't think I've ever had this subject covered, and I don't think on all of my friends' podcasts anybody ever's covered this subject. So enjoy. It'll give you a little food for thought for sure.
That's good.
All right, everybody. You know who it is. You know what show it is. Who you don't know is my guest, Alex Peacock. And Alex reached out to me. He is the owner-trainer of Alex's Dog Training, but not from my normal listener's standpoint of view, although I know a lot of my listeners' dogs could probably use a little help. And Alex specializes in a lot of things, but today we're going to talk about anxiety in dogs, which I think I know what it means, but I don't know if I know what it means. And so a little clarification, Alex, a little well, not even a background, just where you're calling from and where's your school or where's your training out of, and then kind of give us a little, Reader's Digest version of your description of anxiety.
All right, sounds good. Well, I'm super excited to be on the show. Thanks for welcoming me on. I grew up with hunting dogs and various dogs, and I was always very frustrated by behaviors that they would, promote, or that they would, I guess, manifest that would stress me and my family out. And so I decided to try to work on it. Lo and behold, years later, here I am. I'm a trainer now. I live in New Hampshire with my wife. We have two dogs. We have an American Pit Bull Terrier, and we have an Old English Bulldog. And I have been, for my career, I've been a behavior modification trainer, but have decided to lean towards specializing in anxiety for a number of reasons. A few reasons being that, I found it was an area where people really needed help and lacked a lot of professional help. There were not as many trainers that were really well versed in it as there could have been. And so I thought this is something I could really fill a need with, but also because I find it super interesting. So I'm excited to chat about. Most people don't like to talk about anxiety in dogs. It can be a complex topic. It can be a frustrating topic. I love when someone says my dog is anxious. That's like, I'm all about that. I'm ready to
Right,
dig in, right?
right.
That's my thing. That's what I can spend all day, every day doing and working with. Anxiety typically manifests in a few ways. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version here. It typically manifests in a few ways. Essentially, anxiety is a misperception of the world around the dog, right? So the dog perceives threat where there is not threat. And then, of course, reacts accordingly. Some dogs are going to react more aggressively, we could say. So with barking, with some lunging, of course, anxiety can turn into aggression, actual aggression as well, biting and things like that. I've heard most trainers will agree that 90% or so of anxiety of aggression, excuse me, is because of anxiety. And so it can definitely become that. But the types that I typically focus on is either barking a ton, being super obsessive about it, where they, new person walks in the door and they will not stop barking, or at least bark so intensely and for so long that it's a very big detriment to them, the family, and the guest. And then there's, of course, the second type of anxiety, which is more of a run and hide type of anxiety. So I call it the fighters versus the flighters is typically the terms that I use. The runners versus the ones that are going to actually face it. And there's two reasons for those two reactions, right? The first reaction, the fight reaction, it makes sense. It's if I can scare you away and put up a big threat display without having to actually do anything about it, right? Because I am scared, I'm not actually confident, then that's going to be better for me. So I'm going to bark, bark, bark. And think about how often this works, right? This is one of the problems. Even, for example, there's a jogger running down the road, your dog goes and barks at the window, then the jogger runs away. So in the dog's mind, yes, I did it. The scary thing left.
The W column for him.
Exactly. So then he learns every time something like that happens, right? Or even someone walks in the door, the dog suddenly starts barking, the person is going to jump back, right? Whoa, that's a little bit scary. They kind of jump backwards. The dog learns, okay, I can get distance by doing this barking. Every time that happens, the dog learns, it reinforces that habit, right? And the dog learns, okay, I can avoid my perceived threat by threatening it myself, by solving the problem before it becomes a problem and scaring the thing away, right? And then we also tend to have people over less often. We tend to put the dog in those situations less often. So it really does become a solution. It's an inappropriate solution, but it does become a solution for the dog. And then, of course, the other one is very self-explanatory, running away. If I can get away, hide. Sometimes if they can't get away, you'll often see just what I call avoidance, which is just looking away. So it's the whole I can't see you, you can't see me principle. Like a little kid hides under a blanket, right? So you look away and now we're not facing the issue. So at least we don't have to confront it. So that's kind of what I deal with. That's the anxiety that I deal with. I'm out of New Hampshire. My training is out of New Hampshire, but most of my anxiety training is online based. So I have multiple online programs. I can help you wherever you're at in the world. That's what I focus on really right now.
The closest thing I want to start with, it's a bit of a story, and I don't want to claim that this dog had anxiety, but when you mention excessive barking, like there's this amount of barking that I think is normal for a dog. Like when I take two dogs out, let's say in the grouse woods, and I leave one of them behind, they'll bark. It's kind of like, hey, what about me? Hey, what up, and then that usually dissipates. He lays down, and he's also learned that when you come back, he gets his turn. So he's kind of learned that being quiet, he barked for a while, but being quiet actually paid off because you came back when he was quiet. So he kind of taught himself to be quiet. But there are dogs, and a lot of them, that could literally bark for an hour straight. And it's not because you took his buddy out next to him and he saw you walk away with a shotgun, right? You just put them in the truck, you close the door, and they're in a safe kennel. We'll probably cover like those dogs need to be in a safe kennel, right, later on. But it never stops, right? It just goes on and on. But then you go hunting with this dog, or you see all the other attributes in what I do in a hunting test, and the dog seems pretty normal to me. He lets me examine his mouth during that part of the test. He doesn't, when he's bringing back a bird, he doesn't flare away from the judges and kind of look, he pretty much does a nice job. Now, is that, you think, just a learned piece of anxiety, like, as opposed to a breeding? There's got to be some of it that's got to do with breeding, but or is this dog got, let's just say, a touch of anxiety, right? What do you think?
Right.
A dog that just seems normal, and I'm going to say every other aspect, but you put him in that truck and it's a basket case.
Right, absolutely. So there's a few thoughts on that. Definitely genetics. I always like to take a look at genetics when I can. It's not always possible because you don't always know the parents of the dogs. I've never met the breeder of my older dog. I don't know much about his genetics, except for what I can see right in front of me. Genetics can definitely play a role, and I've talked to a lot of breeders, and they talk a lot about how they try to look really hard for signs of anxiety in their adult dogs as well as in their puppies, so that they can remove that genetically. But in most of these cases, there's two other things that I'll mainly say. In most of these cases, I would say much more of the time than anxiety, it's typically more of a not learning how to have self-control in exciting environments. And I love your programs. I was watching your foundational course, and I
Okay.
really love how much you guys talk about impulse control and about helping a dog learn to regulate. One of my big things is, just like a human needs to learn how to regulate, right? You can't have, you want to teach a kid how to regulate their emotions as they grow up.
Right.
Dogs
Right.
have to learn the same thing. And so you have to be able to say, okay, I want you to be calm now. I want you to be excited now. I want you to engage with this and not engage with this. And of course, there's a component of, we have to understand where the dog is coming from. We don't want to torture them by not letting them engage with anything ever. It has to be balanced. But
Right.
I think it's very important, what's happening in that moment, right, is in the dog's mind. There's exciting things going on, and he starts barking. Now, some dogs will bark for a while, nothing happens, it doesn't work, quote unquote, right? So they kind of give up and relax. But some dogs have way too much stamina for that. And there are some dogs that self-reward by the bark is a release of that excitement. So for certain dogs, every time they release some of that excitement, it feels nice. It's like, okay, I'm doing something about it. So the barking actually becomes a self-rewarding or self-sustaining habit, right? Where it's bark, 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 and that excitement is getting released every time, and therefore they're learning a habit of, okay, I can bark, that feels good, and then I charge up again, I bark again, so it becomes this very quick, very, very constant habit. So for those dogs, I always recommend you got to start small. You have to start with small, exciting things, but you have to teach them how to disengage from an exciting thing simply by their own will, by their own mental power, right? Now it's going to be guided by you, but they have to be able to do it without, kind of on their own in a sense. So usually what I recommend for dogs like that, there's a few things I recommend. Obviously, if you can begin as a puppy, that's going to be the best thing, right? It's always easiest if you begin things as a puppy. But there's a lot of ways to work on impulse control generally. One of them is, of course, to do, to help them learn how to wait before walking through a door, wait before eating their food, those kinds of things. But there's a second component that a lot of trainers don't focus on, a lot of owners don't focus on, and for me has always been really huge with a lot of the dogs I work with because I focus so much on impulse control, which is telling them not to go for something and not letting them get it at all, ever. So you're going to, for me, what I'll usually do to start this exercise is I'll take a treat. I'll go to place that treat on the ground. And as soon as the dog goes to move forward, I'm going to give them whatever my sound of disagreement is. If I need to, I'm going to step forward, I'm going to body block, and I'm going to kind of send them back. It's easiest to do this in a hallway or somewhere where they can't get around you. And it's easiest if you have, maybe they're allowed to stay in the carpeted area, but you're on the hardwood area or something like that. So the more distinction you have between where they're allowed to go and not is easiest.
Right.
But I can do this anywhere at any time with my dogs and have them listen very well to it. You're going to take that treat, you go to set it on the ground or set it on a chair. Tell them not to get it, and you're going to slowly progress through that where they come forward, no, body block. Then wait till they've kind of settled, go to start setting it down again. If they come forward, you just pause right where you are, no, body block if you need to. And almost every dog that I do this with, within just a few minutes, they recognize that, okay, I'm not allowed to have that thing, and they'll stay back at that respectful distance. Now, you always want to watch the eyes and catch them in the decision point. So when they start to stare at that treat or a toy, if they're more toy motivated, wait for that decision point. It's always best if you can catch it in the decision and not the action. So they think, I'm going to go for that. You can see that in their eyes, right? You can see when they're focused in and they're starting to key themselves up. If you hit them with the no right then, or hit them with whatever your sound of disagreement is, that's when you're going to get the best results. And with most dogs, and especially with puppies, it's easiest with puppies, believe it or not, with most dogs, pretty quickly, they're going to actually start to settle. And I have owners all the time where I'll do this exercise. And then, especially with puppies, this is very common. The dog will kind of look at me like, huh, this has never happened before. And then he or she will turn, walk away, and they'll often either go to their bed or to the owner's feet or just somewhere on the floor, and they'll just lay down and take a nap. And the owner will tell me he never naps at this time of day. This dog, it never settles like that. And it's
Right.
because setting up boundaries like that, teaching them how to decide, they're right then, they're focusing on not engaging with the exciting thing.
Yeah.
And that type of focus calms a dog. And so the more you practice that type of thing, the more naturally they learn how to disengage from something exciting and relax themselves. Another thing that I love to do for a dog like that, super, super love to do, I call it the art of doing nothing. So teaching a dog, and it's the same basic idea, but with a little more nuance. So what you do is instead of saying, okay, here's a treat, I'm going to set on the ground, you just say, first I like to do this in a boring room. Once we've accomplished it in a boring room, we can move to the park or to, the living room, things like that.
Simulation.
But you
Yeah.
want to teach them. Well, yeah, exactly. But you want to teach them, hey, we're going to sit down and we're just going to relax and we're just going to observe the world. And you can do that a variety of ways. You can use a sit, stay, things like that, but you don't have to. I often will just kind of set my foot on the leash, and I call it just get boring. So I'll just set my foot on the leash. I'll sit down. I'll put like a podcast or an audiobook in and just listen to that. I'll just get real boring. And we'll just sit there for as long as it takes the dog to just relax. It's always best if you do this after exercise or when they're already ready to relax, but you just wait for them to relax. And once they've relaxed, if they learn that we don't go do anything until I've relaxed, then they start learning how to relax on command. It gets faster and faster. My pit bull is one of the most energetic, intense dogs I've ever met. And for him, it was, I think the first time we did that exercise took him like 25 minutes to settle and just lay down and chill. Second time took him about 12 minutes. Third time it was like 3 minutes. And the fourth time it was about 30 seconds. And now anytime I need him to settle, if I just step on that leash and I just kind of sit down and get boring, he'll go, oh, okay. And he'll just hop right down, just relax, totally relax.
Yeah.
So those types of things, doing nothing and impulse control are huge for dogs like that. And then you work them up into, when you put a dog in a crate in the truck and they're in the hunting environment, right? They are, I mean, you've worked with, tons of these dogs, right? They are just stoked. This is peak. This is the moment they live for, right? Is this hunt. And so all of these things are super, super exciting. So what I would say is you want to do a variety of practices where you're putting them in that crate situation first in a boring environment. I often will recommend when people have a puppy, put them in a crate in your living room while you have family game night and just have them take a nap while you're doing exciting things as a family 6 feet away from them. And so as you work them into, okay, you're in a truck in a crate and you're relaxed in a calm environment. Now we're going to have someone chatting outside the truck. Now we're going to be post-hunt or pre-hunt, whatever it is, you slowly work them up into it. They're going to learn how to just relax in the crate. So,
that it kind of speaks to two things. I know this is something that happens with bird dog people. They get the dog, let's say it's 4 or 5 months old. Let's say they've done a decent job of crate training at home, right? Where he will be quiet overnight and holds his bladder. So he's pretty cool and calm. But that same person, I like what you said about using that crate in different areas. He goes, oh, okay, he's old enough to take out to the training grounds now. And the first thing he does is he comes out of that truck and he finds a bird, right? He gets stimulated. It would almost make sense to bring him to that training ground and he doesn't even get a turn. It kind of goes to the no treat. Like, oh, I thought this was real. No, not today.
Right.
But the other thing that speaks to me is, I know I sent you a copy of the Upland Institute Foundations. If you saw the puppy tie-out stake. I think those were 4-month-old Brittany's, and it only took them a couple of 20-minute sessions. And you'll see them, they're on a short tie out. It's very solid stake. There's no give in it. There's no spring. Because, if a dog feels a little give, he's like, oh, I got a little more give, right?
Right.
And in fact, I think it was the female pup just said like, well, I guess I'll wait. And the male pup was digging at the ground and spinning circles. But then he realized there was just nothing in it for him. And then if people would do that more, and I mean, I'm not saying I think that's probably a hard sell for you to some of your pet owners, because they're like, I am not putting my dog on a horseshoe stake in the middle of my yard, right? Because they're going to think like you're mean, like you're tying them out. But that's our version that works really good with young dogs. And I've seen it work with older dogs, but I've also seen it take a lot longer because of their bad behavior,
Right.
But what's really pretty is when you have dogs that were basically raised on what we call the chain gang. We have a long chain. It might have 8 or 10 of those hooks on it, and we attach it to a couple of trees. if you get dogs were all raised in it, you would not, I mean, you'd love it because you love good dog behavior. You could see 8 adult dogs of different ages from, let's say, 6 months to 10 years. Everyone will be standing there or sitting or laying and sleeping. And there's all this activity out there. We're planting birds, there's gunshots, and them dogs are like this, just
Right.
I'll get my turn, you know. But it also
Right.
can't be
That's
that
beautiful.
simple. There's got to be uh, some I would assume some temperament or breeding issues that, I mean, could it be just enough generations of bad raising of dogs where we've got 12 generations of grandparents who were all obsessive barkers? You know what I mean? The,
Right.
you know, how does that manifest? Or do you think, or as a trainer, can you usually improve on it no matter what the situation?
Yeah, I would say genetics definitely always play into it, but I have rarely, if ever, met a dog that can't be significantly improved on at the very least. Most of the time, we can get, like I would say the behaviors that I typically see that are much more difficult to get due to genetics are more of breed related characteristics like like the retrieving type characteristics. Some dogs are just not built to do that. They just don't have an instinct for it. It's very hard for them to ever really learn, like ever become as passionate as
Yeah.
a real retriever, right? But as far as bad behaviors, most of the time they can be very much improved on, and especially things like impulse control. I think that this is something that's a little more inbuilt into the dog's DNA to learn how to be calm in certain situations and hyper in other situations. I lived in the Philippines for a couple of years, and it really opened my eyes to the difference in dogs culturally when there's not so much breed to play into it. Over there, people's houses, typically the door is just open most of the day. If the door's open, it pretty much means people are home. If the door's
Right.
closed, it means they're either sleeping or not home typically. And so you notice dogs have a totally different demeanor there, especially in the areas I was. I was in a lot of farm areas, and they have a totally different demeanor and they have totally different reactions to things. For example, I never got jumped on by a dog there because they just never were taught that strangers are for jumping on and greeting excitedly. They always gave us
Right.
space, right? If anything, they were hostile towards us, right? And they would just give us some space. And they also never, for example, you never see a dog dart out of a door there because the door didn't have the same connotation there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Things like that. And I think so. I think when it comes to things like impulse control, just those kind of very basic things, I think that typically the ability to do those things is pretty inbuilt into every dog. There's definitely genetic variability. Like I said, my pit bull, for example, is one of the most intense hyper dogs that I've met. And it's been harder to get him to the point where he can really reliably, turn off those impulses. But, if you'd met him a few years ago and you saw him the way he is today, it is an insane difference. I mean, I can, for example, I'll do practices with him where I'll throw the ball and we'll be playing fetch and we'll be halfway through our fetch game. I'll throw the ball and just say, nope, come. Have him stop right in the middle of chasing that ball, and he's able to turn that off, come, and then we can turn around, we can walk away, and I can just say, okay, we're going to go for a hike now. And he could just relax by my side. Okay, we forget about that ball. As soon as I tell him, go get the ball, he turns himself back on, he goes and gets the ball. But if I tell him, leave it alone, we're done with it, he can leave it there in the field and be done with it. And that just comes through tons and tons and tons of practice. I liked what you guys talked about. I think it was teach it, train it, and proof it. I'm pretty
Right.
sure it was the three
Yeah.
things. And that just comes from a ton of teaching it, and then a ton of training it, and then a ton of proofing it. And that's really what that ultimately comes from.
Yeah. You don't teach it while you're doing it, right? You don't throw
Right.
the ball 100 times and expect him on 92 to stop. All
No.
it starts small. It could be one throw and then that's it. We're done. And
Right.
maybe
Well, and actually,
he gets two, you know?
right. Well, I'll give you a brief rundown actually of how I did it with him, just to kind of
Yeah.
give everybody an idea of how this works, especially with a really intense dog. And keep in mind, he was 3.5 when I got him, not neutered, so he was very he was very set in his ways as far as being an adult dog, and he was very intense with all those hormones running through him. He was a hardcore guy. And I've rarely seen a dog with that much passion for a ball. Anything ball shaped is like snowmen are like his dream come true. It's just three large balls stacked on top of another. He loves it. And so what I did is the first thing we did is I would, give him some exercise in the day, make sure he was relatively calm just on his own. Then I would take his tennis ball that he usually likes, his favorite type of tennis ball. And I just sat down on the couch with it. I put myself on I put on a TV show or something like that so that I wasn't overthinking it. Because definitely if you're stressed, they're going to sense that. If you're, hyping yourself up, they're going to sense that. So I made sure I was relaxed. And then I just held the ball in my hand. And that's literally all I did. And I basically did the claiming exercise that I outlined earlier, where if he got within a few feet of it, I would tell him to go away. It wasn't a specific stay, anything like that. I don't use a stay in the claiming exercise. It's just don't touch that. You can go do anything you want. Just don't touch this. And what I found was a couple of things. When we did that exercise, he would, after a couple minutes, because there was no extra stimulus, it was just the ball was existing in his presence, right? And he couldn't have it. He would walk away. He was capable of walking away at that point because it wasn't too intense. I was not able to get him to walk away if the ball was doing anything besides, just sitting in my hand. He wasn't able to stop focusing. But if it just sat there, he could stop focusing. And then what he would do is he actually would go upstairs to where my wife was and he would go hang out with her. It was like if he couldn't have the ball, he didn't want to see the ball. So I blocked off the stairs and I made him stay down in the main level with me. It was just in our living room. So I blocked off the other doorway and he was just in the living room. And after probably half an hour, 45 minutes, he finally went over to the corner of the room and he just laid down and relaxed. Now, keep in mind, I hadn't told him to do anything except for not touch this ball. There were other toys around. There were other things he could do. He just went, and actually I will often remove those toys to keep them calm, but I didn't tell him to do anything. Just don't touch this ball. He went over, he laid down and took a nap. We did that a few times in a row until we got to the point where it was probably 3 times of that, where he got to the point where within just a minute or two, he would go lay down and relax. Then I started just slowly, I would just kind of roll the ball from one hand to another or roll it across the floor just a little bit, very slow, just a tiny bit of movement, and do the same thing. He went back to, 40 minutes and then he would finally go lay down. We slowly progressed through the layers, bouncing the ball up and down a tiny bit, then tossing it from hand to hand a little bit, then rolling it all the way across the floor, then tossing it to my wife. And within about a month of practicing all that stuff, we were actually able to take him out to a basketball court. My wife and I played some one-on-one basketball while he took a nap on the other side of the court. No leash, no nothing, just chilling on the other side of the court. Because he learned, slowly, step by step, how to restrain himself and turn off when he needed to that instinct to go chase the ball.
Right.
So, but if you do it right and you do it gradually, it can actually be an incredibly fast transformation, like you're talking about with those puppies, especially when you're working with puppies. It's very quick. And even adult dogs, most of them, if you do it at the right increments, it's a very quick transformation.
Yeah. I mean, I could see where that it kind of also translate to when we do bird work. So on a test, now your average guy's dog is not what we call steady, meaning he smells a bird, he points a bird, the bird gets up and flies, we shoot it, it falls down. It takes a lot of training to get that dog to sit there and wait for that moment. But that's the same thing as the tennis ball. What we do is we let them watch birds fly out of their life. We let them hear gunshots, all these different, and then we slowly put it together. But if you let a dog just find and chase a bird first, find and chase a bird, and then you shoot the bird for the dog, he's never learned that it's not his bird. It's everyone is his bird, or at least possibly his bird.
Right.
And I might do my next dog in the living room with a pigeon.
There you go.
Put the little pigeon over here, put the little pigeon with a tether on it and say, no, that's not your bird. Because
you toss it from hand to hand, pass it back and forth to your wife.
One thing at training, it's amazing. Let's say what we call a bumped bird in a field, especially a planted field for a test. In a high level test, we expect that dog, even if he was just say running forward, right? And that dog saw him coming, the wind wasn't right. So the dog had no idea the bird was there. And the bird just flies away. A really well-trained dog will just stop and go, look at that. And it's beautiful, right? And it's just like the ball thing. It's like, oh, it's not my bird. It's not my ball. Right. But when it is my ball, I understand when it's my ball so what kind of a cue do you, like when you do want to go play with him, like say, okay, I'm going to go burn off a little. Do you have a different approach, or does he just say does he go out there wondering, is this the day where he's going to mess with me? Or is this the day I actually get to go make 20 retrieves in a row? Do you use a certain okay or a certain cue or anything for when it's his turn?
Yeah, I think he does. I think every day of his life, he's like, is he going to mess with me today? Because he's been my guinea pig for years.
My dad's a psychologist, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think he does often. I think too, because of the fact that I use him with, anytime I have a dog on dog issue, I have an aggressive dog I'm working with or something like that. He's always my my dummy dog to not react. Of course, I don't put him in harm's way or anything, but he's the one who doesn't react poorly when other dogs, are aggressive towards him. And so anyway, so I think he also thinks that every other dog in the world, I think he's probably like, I'm the best dog in the world because every dog I meet is a psycho, because he meets all of the crazy dogs. But yeah, when I go out to play with him, I don't always have an exact cue of time to play. More than anything, I have the cue. He typically will, show curiosity towards a toy, and then I can just very quickly tell him, hey, not your toy, and he won't go after it. So if we're like out in the park and he's off leash and we're just doing a casual walk, he's not in a heel or anything like that. And say there's some kids playing soccer, he'll kind of perk up, he'll look, he'll be like, oh, there's a ball. And then I'll just give him a little no or leave it or whatever, and he'll just leave it alone. But typically, if I'm throwing a ball and I don't say anything, he knows that ball's his. He can go after it. So I'll tell him if it's not his, is typically kind of the cue. I don't find it too necessary to have a specific "this is your ball" cue. I will sometimes sit, stay. Once he's in the stay, of course, he can't move for anything. So if his ball is thrown, I don't have to say anything. He's already in the stay.
Right.
And so once he's in that stay, then I'll throw the ball, and then I do have a release command to tell him to go get the ball once I've told him to leave it alone, right? Or same thing, if I just set a ball down, I tell him to leave it alone. I'll release him sometimes to go get it, but I don't have a specific cue for, okay, this is your ball, today, right? It's just
like, I expect good behavior, and I tap you on the head, or I give you your name, and now it's go time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, getting kind of like where I knew we'd go in rabbit holes with this, because I keep thinking of all these different things it applies to. Going back to let's say a dog that has separate. What would you consider separation anxiety? I mean, that's obviously anxiety because it's a second word in it. But is it really anxiety, or what is it when like the dog goes in the kennel? It could be just the kennel's his only bad spot. He might be the best house dog in the world, right? Doesn't chew up the furniture. You could go to the store and he's like, I got a couch, I'm happy, right? But there's those dogs that you literally cannot trust, right? That
right.
In a few minutes, they're like nervous. They're like, no one's here. I mean, and it's probably from, I would say, I'm saying from my side, where with a well-bred dog, it's probably poor training that you kind of facilitated this to happen. You cut crate training short. You gave him his liberties too long, too early. Because you said something early on, or something to this effect. Once a dog learns something on his own, he thinks it's right. There's no conscience with a dog, right? It's like,
right.
The dog that goes into the garbage, he's not an anxious dog. He's just like, I found food. I will go there the rest of my life until, somebody puts a mousetrap in there. And then he might only leave that garbage can alone, right?
Right.
That's not really, but what about the dog that just drives people crazy? Like, I can't leave him alone in the house. He doesn't calm himself. He just up and down, pacing in circles. I mean, would you call that true anxiety in that case?
Yeah. Separation anxiety is a very common problem, very widespread problem. And we saw a big surge of it when people started going back to work after the COVID, lockdowns started to kind of go away. We got a lot of calls for separation anxiety, and we still get, I think it's a very common one. I think there's a few reasons for that. I don't think it's nearly as natural to a dog as it is to a human to separate from, the pack, so to speak, right? Dogs have a much looser sense of the pack idea than like wolves, for example, do. But it doesn't really make much sense as a pack type animal, as a hunting type animal. It doesn't make much sense to separate from everybody. It's strength in numbers, right? So I think that inherently it's something that they more need to be taught. It's one of the few things that we make our dogs do that isn't really natural to them. It's pretty natural to have boundaries and to not go after certain things, and to not be overexcited when you're greeting guests, and those things all have a lot of natural base in the dog. But separation anxiety is not a super, or separation in general is not a supernatural one. It can be very much a true form of anxiety. I would say the biggest difference is just that it varies. There's going to be, when you have a puppy, they're going to have some natural separation anxiety in the sense that you go away and they're like, what do I do with my life? You're what I live for. You're what I love. You know what I mean? Like, you're the thing, you're the guy I listen to. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when you're gone. So I'm just lost and scared. I'm a little puppy. And that's often a mild thing that will kind of go away almost just naturally with time. I definitely always encourage working on it, but a lot of dogs, they'll show some signs of this and it goes with time. Where they're nervous for the first couple of minutes you're out of the house, and then they calm down.
Yeah.
That's still separation anxiety, but a much more mild version. Then you have the dogs who are, it's like almost no matter what you do, no matter what yummy thing you leave them with, no matter how sneaky you try to be when leaving the house, no matter what you do, they freak out. And they could be alone in a room with nothing in it, and still they're trying their best to destroy things. They're freaking out, they're barking, they're going crazy. So separation anxiety can get very intense, and it is definitely anxiety. What I always recommend is there's a couple of primary things you can do. Separation anxiety is relatively simple in the sense that it's not the most complex behavior, but it does often take a decent period of time to fix, and it takes a lot of consistency. The first couple of things I always go for is we're going to work on some, again, if we can make the behavior smaller, if we can make it easier, more bite-sized chunks, we're going to have a better success rate. So I'm going to start with the simple, exercise of just having the dog stay. I'll often do a place, right? So I'll put the dog in their place, have them stay, and then I'm going to go into the kitchen and grab a glass of water and come back, and then release them from the stay. And then I'm going to start doing that more and more often, more and more frequently, longer and longer durations, and having them stay. Of course, you want to make sure they've got a good place, a good stay, that it's rock solid, no matter how far you go, things like that. They're going to stay there, right? Because if you go around the corner, they're likely to jump up and follow you, no matter if they've been told to stay. So you have to test that. You have to make sure but as long as you're careful with how you teach the place and the stay, then you get them to stay for very brief durations. And when you just disappear around the corner, come right back. And eventually you get them to where you can go to the bathroom for 5-10 minutes and have them stay in that place. Because what you're trying to do is, what happens is you get up, you walk to the kitchen, dog follows you. You get up, you walk to the bathroom, dog follows you. You go to the couch, dog follows you. Then you walk out the door, shut the door in their face, and they're like, oh my gosh, I normally follow him everywhere. What am I supposed to do now? Right? Then they freak out, right? And so what you want to do is first just help them learn that just because I go somewhere doesn't mean you follow me. And if I tell you to wait here, you wait here, I'll be back. It'll be fine. You don't have to worry about it. So that's what I usually focus on first. It's something like that. And then I'll start testing it where I'll walk out, once they're really, really good at that, then I'll walk out the front door and come right back in. And then I'll walk out the front door, stay out there for a minute, come back in, or the garage door, whatever door you typically leave out of, right? I might go out of the garage, start the car, and then turn it off, come back in, right? I'm going to try to introduce as many of those, things and triggers and sounds as possible in a low level environment while keeping them in that stay. And the more I can do that, the more they get used to the idea that, yeah, you walking away is not a scary thing. You'll come back. I don't have to worry about it. A few other things that you can focus on. I always, if I can, I'm always going to try to leave them with something to do, partly to discourage destructive behaviors, but partly to encourage them to not focus on me leaving. There's a few things you can leave them with. Obviously, everything you leave a dog with is going to have some level of risk, in the sense that there's almost nothing you can leave a dog to chew or lick that isn't some sort of choking hazard or something like that. But there's certain ones that are much safer. And depending on the dog, I recommend different things. I often feel pretty comfortable leaving a bully stick with a dog if it's a dog that handles those well. Some sort of marrow bone can be decent if it's a very safe kind. I always recommend, I'm not a vet, so I always recommend talk to your vet first, see what they approve you to leave your dog alone with. One of my favorite things recently, though, that I think is probably one of the least choking hazards to leave a dog with, is I'll take a bowl, I'll put some peanut butter in the bottom of it, like smear it, a good little layer in the bottom. I'll put some treats, maybe blueberries, something like that, little bits of chicken in the peanut butter, and then I'm going to put some water in there until it just barely covers the treats. And then I'll freeze that. And you want to do it in a metal dog dish so they can't chew up the dog dish. I'll freeze that. And then when I need to leave, or when I need my dog to be busy, but I don't want to worry about them choking or anything like that, I'll just hand them that bowl. And it takes them forever to they just lick the ice over and over. The ice tastes yummy because it's got some of that peanut butter in it, some of the flavor of whatever you put in there. And so they lick through that ice, and it takes them a long time to lick through it. There's really nothing for them to choke on because it's ice. I mean, of course, you could choke on just about anything. So the frozen chunks in there, they could theoretically maybe choke on, but it's a very low choking hazard, very safe thing overall. I've talked to my vet about it. He approved it for at least my dog. So it's, I have got it kind of vet approved overall. So that's one of my favorite things to leave with them. But if you can leave them with something, that's going to be easiest, because then they do have something to focus on while you're gone. And then, of course, leaving for brief durations at first, once you're actually leaving the house. So you leave just to go to the store real quick, you come right back, maybe not for a full day of work yet or anything like that. So it's about working the dog slowly into it. And then one of the other sides of it too is that same thing we talked about with impulse control, where the art of doing nothing. Have your dog learn how to have you in the room doing things and not engage with you. So maybe you put them in their crate and you're doing things, you're up moving, maybe you're doing family game night, you're up and around, you're doing exciting things, and the dog is essentially they're with you in the same room, but they're separate in activity. And that's a big deal too, because that means that when you're watching TV on the couch, they're with you on the couch, right? When you're doing whatever, they're with you. So then when you leave the door, when you go out the door, in their mind, they should be with you. But if they've already practiced tons of activities where you're doing one activity and they're separate, they're relaxing, they're not thinking about it, then they're more used to it. So those are the typical go-tos for me for separation anxiety.
Um, what you said something, and I should have made a note of it because my brain started going, oh, that ties into a friend of mine's dog, and he'll listen. He listens to every podcast, and he'll know who I'm talking about. I'm gonna try that frozen bowl of something just out of curiosity. Again, I know this guy's dog is a house dog. I've never been in a house with him, but he assures me the dog is fine. But I think the next time I go hunt with him, I'm gonna have a frozen bowl of something and just see if that dog finds that more interesting than barking. just,
He
just
might.
he might, right?
He might, and it could be, I'm definitely, I'm a solve the root of the problem guy, but I'm also a huge fan of quick fixes. And sometimes it's simpler and more enjoyable for everybody involved to just use a simple fix of, hey, maybe he just needs something to do, right? It's like,
Right.
so definitely there's no shame in that either.
All right. So going back, so doing these exercises, that makes total sense to me. I'm kind of lucky. Uh, my wife's my wife's got a house dog, which is a corgi. All my dogs are outside in kennels, but they're in this room with me. I mean, they can see me, hear me. They're all being quiet. They're all bored. They're all laying there. So they've pretty much learned their impulse control. Now, when I start opening one door, all hell breaks loose, of course, and I've let them do that and they've learned it. So, but I mean, to do a recording and they're all like, oh yeah, that's where he's talking. But when someone's doing this to their house, they have one dog and they want to start doing this early, let's say, impulse controller to stop anxiety. When you said put them in a place, you're talking about it on like a dog bed or a place board, or a small piece of carpet. Because if you put him in a kennel, then obviously he can't follow you out of the room. So what kind of when you say a place, are you using a dog bed, just a throw rug? What are you using for his initial place where you teach him to sit?
Yeah, dog bed is my go-to typically. You can also,
Right.
though, and this can be a really helpful one, and this is when I'm doing crate training, I'll often use this kind of same exercise for crate training where I'll do it in the crate, but with the crate door open. So
Okay.
using the crate
That
as essentially a place, but getting them used to the idea that the crate is specifically a place where I'll be left alone for a while you go somewhere else. But
okay.
when you open that door, you remove the physical barrier of them following you, and it's just a mental barrier. The whole issue ultimately with separation anxiety is that you've put up a physical barrier, which, like we were saying, right, a dog, if they can get to it, they will, right? So if it's garbage, if it's just a physical rule, hey, there's a lid on this thing, well, I could figure that out. I could get it off, right?
Right.
Same
Right.
thing with walls and a door, right? Where they're like, hey, if you're just behind that door, then I mean, I can figure out how to get through a door. If I chew it long enough, it'll fall apart, right? That's
Right.
a lot of the reason they start doing those destructive behaviors is in a sense, it's kind of this weird way of connecting. If I destroy this, this
Right.
thing, and that's why often they'll scratch the door, things like that. They're trying to get to you, right?
Right. Right.
So you have to teach them how to not follow you simply because of a mental barrier first, where you say, don't follow me. Here's your rule, right? And then once they've gotten that, you can use the physical barrier to keep them safe and make sure they keep the rule, but also just remind them of the rule, right? So they're like, okay, I'm not supposed to follow you, but also I can't even if I wanted to. That just helps me keep the rule in a sense, right? So
And so my take on this for most people, and um, really good, solid crate training. Again, not getting the dog from a rescue or a dog pound, and then they might have to call you and say, "Look, I don't know what to do." Right? There's a whole lot of people that get dogs and they don't know what to do, and that happens in the hunting world. But if you get that new dog, whether it's whatever breed it is, toy breed, working breed, hunting breed, a really solid crate training, consistent crate training is got to be like the whole start of it, right? If you want it on a good path. Like how adamant are you about crate training? Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're more of a you leave the door open on the crate pretty soon. I don't know if you trust them really quick.
yeah, I definitely lean towards, my old English bulldog, she's just over a year, and if I'm not in the house, she's crated, and if
Yep.
at night she's crated.
Yep.
Just because, I don't fully trust her yet with, she's very well potty trained at this point, so I trust her with
Right.
that at this point.
Right.
Whereas in the beginning, of course, part of the crate training was for potty training.
Sure. Sure.
But I don't trust her to not, most of the time she's great about getting into things, but I don't 100% trust her yet not to
Right.
get into things, right? So that's a lot of the reason that, for her, yeah, she's in the crate if I can't, be aware of where she's at. I'm definitely a huge fan of crate training. I think it's super helpful for potty training. It's super helpful for separation anxiety, preventing it and solving it. And it's also super helpful for, just general maintaining good behaviors. Again, if they learn to get into the garbage, every time they do that, it's reinforcing the habit that the garbage is yummy and accessible, right? So
Yeah.
we want to try to prevent that as much as we can. So keeping them in the crate keeps them out of trouble. And also, as frankly, a safety measure, can't tell you how many dogs, that I've worked with that can swallow incredible things. I met a silver lab once that pooped out a 6-inch bully stick, totally intact. It's like
Yeah.
they can just get incredible things, down the hatch, and that can either be, an expensive surgery or death in worst case
Right.
scenarios, right? And so, just for safety reasons, to me, I think it's a really good idea until you know that your dog doesn't get into stuff. It's a
Right.
really good idea to keep them crated as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I will give a plug for something else that I'm really adamant about. So Gunner Kennels is one of my sponsors, and they make a bulletproof, guaranteed for life, almost a vault door kennel, right? If you put a dog in a very cheap kennel where you can get his paws through it, or in one of those wire, like a show kennel, like a show crate where they can put their arms to it, you're not helping the crate training process, because if they're
Right.
bored, they reach through, they try to pull something in. It's really not confinement at that point. It's kind of like timeout. You're not really getting a swat on the ass, right? It's like
Right.
out on the stairs. Oh, but look, mom left my iPad on the stairs. So,
Right. Exactly.
so that crate should be a crate where it really can't fiddle fart around with things. It's got to be, solid and not prone to a door being wiggly. And the more that door wiggles, the more the dog tries on it. So I've told people that you'd be happy with the crate training from a really solid, well, and there's a few of them out there. I just happen to be, give them their credit where it's due. How do you feel about a wire? Could you do this with a wire crate, or would you always use something with some solid sides on it and a good door?
Yeah, I like I'd say a couple of things on that. I do like the solid crates a lot. Solid sides, good door. I think it's really good. I agree. It gives a little bit. It also gives a little less give to it, so it means that your dog is, not going to try as long for as hard, which can also work towards preventing injury. Wire crates can also, be an issue with. I've seen dogs get, their mouth stuck in it or a paw stuck in it. So,
Yeah.
they also present a little bit more. If you have a dog that's more prone to be so intense that they end up hurting themselves, then wire crate can actually become dangerous.
Right.
For me, I've typically used wire crates with my dogs because they're not as intense in that way. And I also haven't, the two that I currently have, I haven't raised them from puppies. So they've already been big enough that they can't stick their paw through the wire crate. And so I haven't had an issue with it. For more mild mannered dogs that are less intense and maybe a little bit bigger so they can't put their paws through it, I think wire crates are not an issue. But I
Right.
would say if you're going to go for crate training, go for it all the way. So I think, if you can get if you do have a crate that is more robust and, they can't put their paws through it, they can't hurt themselves easily on it, then definitely no brainer. It's going to be much better. So yeah, I like the solid crates a lot.
Yeah, I told a person they just weren't understanding it, and I had to draw an analogy. And coming from the construction world, if you've ever been on construction sites, we have a lot of porta potties, right? They have a lock in the center of the door, but the bottom of the door, you could almost force your way out of it, right? And the
Right.
top of the door. And of course, on all construction sites, back in the day before things were so safety conscious, people would back a truck up and put the tailgate up against the door, and then they can't open it. And they're stuck in the outhouse.
Yep.
And we're having a good laugh. But what I'm trying to tell these people is, like, if you were stuck in an outhouse and the door handle just for some reason really was frozen, let's just say, but the top of the door gave and the bottom of the door gave, you're going to keep trying to escape, because,
Mhm.
and that's the same way a dog does when they've got an inadequate security. They are going to work it and worry it until same thing with a dog. I knew of a dog. I didn't know the dog personally. The owner just got tired of the early puppies, not puppies. It was already probably 6 months old. The wife pretty much said, he's got to be in the garage. He's just got to be in the garage. The dog clawed through the drywall in the garage between the studs and ended up in the house. And
Right.
what did that dog learn? I won, right? There
Right.
was there was a weakness. But you think about it, the first strike on the drywall couldn't have been weak, but it was something, you know.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And when they learn something, again, it's so simple to say consistency and doing it right early. But let's say a person, and I could tell, I could tell you this person's name, has a 2-year-old dog. They didn't want to crate train it, and now they want to crate train it. Is that an obstacle, or would you just go to it like a puppy when you bring it home? It's going to be over by the door. We're going to close the door. We're not going to, it's like a baby in a crib. You're going to cry yourself and soothe yourself to sleep. Would you do that with an older dog, or would you take a different approach with it?
Yeah, so first it's a little bit more difficult, to crate train a dog when they're older because they are already kind of set in a lot of habits, right?
Mhm.
It's really never impossible to teach it. Old dogs can learn new tricks. It's very possible. I've taught a
Right.
lot of old dogs. Um, I would say usually I go about it a couple different ways. First thing is I want to evaluate the dog. How intense is this dog with the crate? If if I don't think that the dog is going to calm itself relatively quickly in the crate, then I won't always leave it in there to, cry it out, so to speak.
Mhm.
Partly for safety reasons. They can get so hard on the crate that they end up, if they tear out a nail, that can be very dangerous very quick.
Yeah.
They can, hurt themselves in various ways. Not to mention it can become extremely frustrating when you're not in a professional training environment. You're in a house environment, so it's
Right.
driving the kids nuts. It's driving the wife nuts. Nobody can sleep. It's driving everybody crazy, right? And
Right.
so that's another reason I won't always go straight for the leave it in the crate, let it cry it out type of
Right.
approach. What I'll usually do is I start with the whole crate door open, leave it in there, get it to stay in there when I tell it, kind of use the crate as a place essentially. Once
Right.
it's getting decent at that, then I'm going to start to close the door. I'll often also start leaving them, at first with something to do in the crate, especially when I make a big step like close the door. I might give them some sort of thing to do. Not anything too crazy exciting, just something to gnaw on, something, maybe the ice bowl, something like that.
Yeah.
And at first, when I shut the door, I'm not even going to disappear out of sight. I'm just going to shut the door and I'm just, I might be in the living room. I'm going to put them in the crate, give them whatever treat, shut the door, and then I'm going to sit down and watch TV or whatever, do, like I said, do a bit of a family game night. Then, as they get really good at that, and as long as they're already good at me walking out of the room without the crate associated, then they're good at me leaving them alone. Then I'm going to start to close the crate door and actually walk out of the room. So
Right.
definitely possible to crate train an older dog. And just like with any, even a puppy, take it as slow as the dog needs. As long as you're seeing progress, then you're on the right track. Just keep going with that. And, it can take a little while. The hardest thing about that is if you can't leave the dog out at all because they'll destroy things while you're gone, then you might need to rush crate training a little bit faster. And
Right.
that can work for sure. You just, you want to kind of weigh it out. Is it going to be better for me to take a little extra time and do this really well where the dog loves the crate? Or is it going to be better for me to rush this a little bit because I don't need my dog eating garbage and, getting themselves impacted? So
Right.
it's, a little bit case by case, but
I'm going to share a picture with you when you said about an older dog. This one isn't too old, but um, not being around and thinking you're doing the right thing. Take a look at that one.
oh my gosh.
Now he couldn't get his head back out because of the way plastic flexes.
Seriously. Wow.
I mean,
And those
and
are not big holes.
no, but he got his teeth on there and started working it and worked it. Look at that. It looks like he's getting his head chopped off with the guillotine.
Oh my
That's not,
gosh.
that would go to the point of like you do this with a lot of supervision in the beginning, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'll even, oftentimes, especially if the dog is a little bit more of a high risk dog in the sense that they're going to try harder, I'll almost always have a camera on them. I'll just buy, you can buy a cheap baby monitor type camera off of Amazon
Yeah,
for
that's
15
true.
bucks. It'll connect with your phone, and I'll
Yeah.
just put a camera in front of the crate. And that way I can watch them. And the other reason I'll do that is I like to try to only come back in the room if I've left the room and the dog is doing well with separation, right? Once I get to the point where it's almost the proofing it point basically where you're getting the duration a little bit. If I
Mhm.
walk out of the room and that dog starts freaking out, I don't want to walk back in the room unless the dog is calm. Ideally,
Right.
like I said,
Because then
for safety reasons can't always work.
yeah,
What was that?
you're rewarding him if you go there when he's acting like a ninja.
Precisely. Exactly. So I like to pretty much try to only come back when he's calm. And I won't always let him right out if I come back when he's calm too. I might come in and out of the room a few times while he's
Right.
calm. So I'll walk out of the room and then I'll watch the dog on my phone. Once they relax, then I'm going to come back in the room. So that also helps because you may not know, they may have stopped whining or barking, but they might still be standing there waiting, right? So they're still in that anxious, nervous mindset. So if you wait till they genuinely calm down, then you come back, then you're rewarding a positive mindset.
Right. Right. You know, I think I shouldn't say it. I think most people do, except that's why you're in business and probably 1,000 other trainers across the country for people whose dogs don't behave well. But I want to get into aggression because you talked about two kinds of anxiety, right? There's and I've seen the dogs that come out and they literally, they kind of cower, and eventually they might become, as long as they're exposed to more things, more people, but they always kind of got that little apprehension, you know, but people can kind of live with that. But whether it's people, but more importantly, dog on dog aggression. Like if somebody calls you up and says, Alex, I'm trying to take my dog on a walk. If it sees another dog, it's going to pull my arm off the leash. Now, do I want to say this dog's got an anxiety problem, or this dog is just like the kids that went to Catholic school? They were always looking for a fight afterward. I don't know. But let's assume this dog has an anxiety problem, but his anxiety is to engage. Like you said, it may not be that he wants to fight, but he wants to make it look like he wants to fight, which is just as scary to two dog owners as the actual fight, right?
Right, absolutely. And it can be hard to know the difference until you actually let him do what he feels like doing, right?
It sounds the same until one of them starts kai-eyeing because of a hole in the ear, right? It sounds like the same fight, but it could literally just be a dog that's super afraid.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know you can't say like, oh, that's how I fix it. What would be a typical, what would you do to work on this dog that just is fine? And I shouldn't say they're not fine. You're on a leash and it sees another dog and it just goes ballistic, for lack of a better word, right?
Goes crazy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I take a quick bathroom break before we do that?
No, not at all.
Sound good? Okay.
Let me hit the pause. Okay, we were talking about and this is a real common thing in the hunting dog world, and I imagine it is in the pet dog world. The dog that, you know, wants to fight with another dog or wants to act like it wants to fight, and it becomes a real problem for people.
Right.
I don't know, say what's the solution, but what are some things people can do with that?
Absolutely. So the first thing I think is to understand it. So there's a lot of different types of a lot of different levels of anxiety, different types of anxiety, as well as different levels and types of aggression. Leash aggression, or I like to call it more broadly like restraint aggression, is very, very common. And this is often less of a actual aggression thing, and it's more of either an overstimulation thing or an anxiety thing. So it's very common with fences, with gateways, with leashes, things like that. I used to work at a dog daycare a number of years ago, and we would have dogs that were fence fighters, where as soon as you shut the door to their run, they would turn around and start reacting to whatever dogs were nearby. And I think a lot of times that restraint can cause with an overexcited dog, which is a lot of what that reaction is. So a lot of it's overexcitement. They're super overexcited. They start to pull towards another dog, and same type of thing as when they're in the crate and they're barking, right? Where they start pulling towards that dog. They start barking, they start releasing some of that excitement, and that feels really good. And it very quickly spirals out of control where they feel that release of, okay, I'm barking and that's nice. I'm doing something about the thing that I'm feeling. And so then it very quickly becomes a very intense behavior to the point where they build themselves up and they get really, really, really intense to where they actually start to become genuinely aggressive just because of how much excitement has built up in them. Right. Not only that, of course, the human behind the leash is also building up their own excitement. It's usually a negative excitement, right? But it's a nervousness, a stress. Yeah. Oh my gosh, my dog is freaking out. I can't control him. I'm frustrated, whatever. So that's also adding to the dog's intensity, right? So that's one type of leash reactivity, and that's the excitement side. Very common also to have anxious-driven leash reactivity, which is kind of what we're focusing on. So that anxiety-driven stuff, same type of idea, right, as we were talking about earlier, where your dog sees a potential threat and says, I need to get that threat to go away. I need to neutralize the threat as quickly as possible. So let's get it to leave. So they start barking, And then, of course, the leash makes them a little bit brave, right? They start pulling and the leash pulls them back, which makes them pull a little bit stronger. And especially because there's typically a little give in a leash, they feel like they're winning that a little bit, right? So they
Right.
start to pull even harder and harder. So they start to really pull on that leash, really freak out, really bark. Of course, again, that also feels good because they're doing something about the anxious excitement that they have. So they're releasing that. So that tends to feel good. And of course, oftentimes that means the other dog goes away. The other owner is going to try to leave the situation. You're going to try to leave the situation. So it neutralizes things. It makes things better. So the dog learns that it is a solution. There's a few things I always start to recommend for this. And it depends a little bit. It definitely depends on the dog that's in front of me, right? Depending on what the specific behavior is, what I see, there's a lot of little signals that I pay attention to. But typically there's a few things that I go for right off the bat. First thing is we want to try to minimize the stimulus to the point where it's easier for the dog not to react to it. So we're going to use a dog that's far away at first. We're not going to be trying to walk on a path, a hiking path right next to a bunch of other dogs. We're going to start with the dog really far away. Sometimes I'll actually use dog parks for this if resources are limited, where I'll go to the dog park, I'll park far away from it, and I'll get out of the car and I'll just be on the other side of the area where there's a dog park fenced in really far away from me. The dogs can be seen, they can be heard, but they're really far away and they're contained. So as much as you can get the stimulus to be the trigger to be lessened, that's going to make it easier on the dog. Next thing is I always recommend using the right tools. So I'm a huge fan of the prong collar. Actually, I think when it's used correctly, it can be a really fantastic tool. Get a high quality one, learn how to use it properly. But if you can give just a little correction here and there with the prong collar early on in that reaction process, that can really help you, especially with the excitement driven dogs or the genuinely aggression driven dogs. That can be helpful. Side note, when you're working on real, actual aggressive cases, I always recommend work with a professional trainer because that can get dangerous. The dog can redirect. If the dog does get loose, you can cause a lot of damage. So if you're working with real, dangerous behaviors, I always recommend work with a professional, of course, but especially if you're working with dangerous behaviors, please work with a professional. But when you're, you've got that stimulus further away, you've got your proper tools, something that you can actually give the dog a little correction with. There's a few things that I'll do at first to guide the dog through it. The first thing is I'm going to use leash tension very precisely. So tension on the leash is just as important a tool as the leash itself. And you guys talk about this in your foundations course too, I believe, where you talk about using that, long line to give the dog a little pop here and there to bring them back to you, to guide them to you, whatever, right? To stop them from chasing something. So the pressure is just as important as the leash and the tool itself. I want that dog to know that that leash is going to be relaxed all the time unless I'm correcting them and telling them to stop doing something. So the first thing is to make sure that that leash is relaxed, relaxed, relaxed. The dog goes to focus on that dog and you give them a little pop, or you start pulling them in the other direction fairly quickly, whatever it is to snap them out of it, get them to refocus on you. As they're coming towards you, especially if it's an excitement driven dog, I'm going to be hitting them up with some good boy, and we're going to start to move in the opposite direction really quickly. So I get them refocused on doing something else. You want to start working that, hey, I see the dog, I start to fixate just barely, and then I get distracted. I get shown, hey, let's go do something else. So it's about a small correction, a very, very small correction. And I say very small just because if you time it right, you don't need anything big. If the dog is already going crazy, you'll need a lot bigger correction to get them out of it. But I like to try to time it for that moment, the decision moment. So I see them staring, little pop on the leash, call them back over to me. If you've got a treat-driven dog, you can definitely use treats at this point. I frequently don't. I'll usually just, use some affection, some verbal, confirmations. And then we just practice that over and over, right? We practice helping them learn leashes, relax, relax, relax. You start focusing on the dog. I'm going to give you a little pop. That means you should come over to me, follow me. If we're in a strict heel or something like that, then of course it's a little bit different. We're just going to be walking. They start to pay too much attention. I give them a little pop. They refocus in on the heel. Good boy. We just keep going. So it's about lessening the stimulus or distancing it, using the right tool, using your leash pressure very intentionally, correcting at the right moment, and then using rewards as needed. Now that's going to correct a lot of your more distance reactions. So that's going to make sure that you can pass dogs on leash, no interaction, and have a good, well-behaved, calm dog. That's not necessarily going to fix it. It does a great deal towards helping, but it's not necessarily going to fix their actual one-to-one interactions with dogs. If you have a dog that is totally fine with dogs when they're on or off leash and they're just interacting, playing with them, then it's just an on leash thing, then this is really all you need. But if you have a dog that's aggressive towards other dogs, regardless of the circumstance, essentially, or at least strange dogs, regardless of the circumstance, then you'll need a much more in-depth approach to fix it overall, right? And some dogs never really they're just not dog-on-dog interaction type dogs. They don't really care about meeting other dogs and playing with them. And those dogs, I'm not going to push too far. I want them to be able to react civilly. If there's a dog that runs up to us off leash, I want them to react calmly and civilly and then be able to just move on. But I'm not I'm not going to take them to the dog park. I'm not going to send them doggy daycare. I'm not going to bring them to the family barbecue where there's 6 other dogs. They can live a fairly solitary life compared to other dogs.
Yeah.
There are ways to get them used to interacting with other strange dogs. But like I said, that we're talking mostly about the leash reactivity stuff. And that's usually how I tackle it.
Would you, let's say, and I'm drawing a scenario here, you have a customer that is working on this, and you'd say, let's try this. We're going to go 150 feet away from this dog park, and we're going to give you some work to do. Are you going to eventually move closer and closer to that dog park fence?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the bigger thing, like I said, is I'm slowly increasing the way I like to think about it is you're increasing the intensity of the stimulus. So increasing the proximity to it is important, but also increasing, like, for example, if you're just walking, in a park and there's dogs 100 yards away on leash that are calm, then you would move to, okay, now we're seeing dogs that are playing. Now we're getting closer to the dogs that are playing. Now we're walking right along the dog park fence. The dogs are barking at us. They're at the fence. They're sniffing towards us, and we're still just ignoring them. It's the same basic idea, right? Where we're teaching them kind of impulse control still is really what we're focusing on. We're just teaching them, hey, there's dogs there. You just don't need to interact with it. No matter how close they are, you just ignore them. It's fine. We don't have to worry about that. You're teaching them how to stay relaxed. You can also, with some dogs on the lower level aspect of things, you can engage them in something else like play or some treats. So I've seen a lot of trainers very successfully use like scatter feeding type approach to this, where when their dog starts to key in another dog, they'll give them some sort of little word that tells them to stop focusing on that dog. And then they'll throw, a handful of kibble into the grass. And so now your dog is distracted finding the kibble while the other dog passes by. Those types of things can be very effective too, just because, again, it's them learning that there's a dog over there, but I'm focusing on this. So it helps them learn to disengage from that dog. Ultimately, you want them without any sort of reward or method of coaxing. You want them to be able to not do anything towards the dog and not also do anything with a treat or anything like that. You want them to be neutral towards the situation ultimately.
Right. Something I've I've told a lot of people, if you've ever been to a dog show, we use Westminster for the time example, but there's thousands of those shows all over the country every weekend, right? AKC confirmation shows. I tell you, some of them dogs are the most well-behaved dogs, and they start with these dogs when they're 4 weeks old, stacking them up on a table and dragging their feet back and putting that calming touch is what Justin calls it, where they're on a raised platform and you're basically just, stroking their back, stroking their tail, fiddling with their feet, fiddling with their mouth. And if you could do that early on with a pup, I'm not saying it would eliminate, you might have a pup that's going to have a problem later on, but if you get a young dog, there's so many things you could do right that we don't do. We I got a bird dog, it needs birds. No, its instincts are there for birds. We don't have to worry about it's going to love birds. The word no didn't come from in the instinct, there's no instinct for the word no with a dog.
Right.
Doing all this stuff early, if everybody actually listened and did everything right, they wouldn't need you. But
right.
What is your most typical, would you say, anxiety when somebody calls you up? Like, what is the biggest complaint? Somebody's like, my dog's doing this. What is it?
That's a good one. I get a lot
or
of them.
At least
Separation.
A very common one, maybe not even the most.
Yeah. I get a lot of them. I would say the most common one, separation anxiety, is very common. It's not always like the worst or the most difficult thing, but that's many of the dogs I work with. Even if I get called in for something else, they're also like, yeah, and he also has separation anxiety, which we need to fix. So it's a very common one. Separation anxiety is very common. I would say I deal with a lot of, and kind of where my real peak specialty, I guess, lies is I don't like to call it, I think it's kind of basically reactivity to various things. I don't like to call it reactivity because that has a certain, connotation of the barking and things like that, but it's basically stimulus anxiety. So, a guest anxiety, or I've dealt with a lot of dogs who have incessant barking where any tiny noise and they're just barking like crazy. And no
Right.
matter what's going on, no matter what time of day or night, they're always, 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 always barking. So I think stimulus anxiety is a very common one where either they're afraid of guests or they're afraid of cars, or they're afraid of fireworks or thunder, or they're afraid of they're simply hyper alert in a nervous way, right? They're nervous that there's a threat outside always, so they're hyper alert towards those potential threats. That's a very common one. So yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest ones is the overall, afraid of some sort of stimulus and reacting to it either by running and hiding or by running towards it.
Right. And when people have that dog, and I and I may be wrong here, but I feel like dog people are the same, whether they're pet dogs or hunting dog owners. They probably realized for the last 8 months that this has been driving them crazy, and then they call you. So you're fighting 8 months of bad behavior to try to
Yep.
reprogram this dog.
Yeah, no, absolutely. People don't. I do get some people who call me. I've actually had some people who adopt a dog, and I've had a couple of people actually call me on the way home from adopting a dog. They say, "Hey, I just picked up a dog 20 minutes ago, and I need a trainer." And
Right.
because they're like, I know I'm going to need some help with whatever. So can you come in a week or whatever? So I do have some people to catch things early. But most of the time, people call me. I get a lot of people who call me after an incident, right? There was something that happened that made them realize this isn't going away. This is a big issue, and I need professional help.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is. It's best if you call before then. It's like if, when
Right.
we get to that point, it's harder. And honestly, I would say it's not even because of the dog. It's mostly because when you call once you've had that moment, usually your own stress is at a much higher level and your own patience has worn away a lot more. You're not, my focus is training the owners. That's why I started my online programs. I've done rehabilitation where I bring dogs in and rehabilitate them myself. I do a lot of private in-home training. And what I've found is that with neither of those methods am I able to really teach the owner as precisely and as well as I could if I had, that's why I'm doing, making this pre-recorded course where it's a blended learning program where you get time directly with me one-on-one through video chats and stuff. You can also send me lots of update videos, things like that, but then you also get the pre-recorded stuff. And the reason is because I feel that it's most important. Even once I've rehabilitated a dog, I'll send them back to the owners. I give them all this information, but because they weren't there for the process, they're not able to maintain it very well. I can transform a dog in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. They'll come back as a pretty different dog, and
Right.
and then the owners will say, "Oh my gosh, this is great," and then within a few months, they're like, we can tell that we're not doing this. We're not doing everything you were doing in the ways that you would do it, and so the dog is reverting, and so that's when I come into a situation late where someone's like, I called you because I'm really running out of patience here. The problem is usually the owner doesn't have enough steam to really see the training through.
Right. And it doesn't take, I mean, I think everybody said this. It doesn't take a lot of time in a day to do these things with a dog. And I'm sure you've heard, oh, I just don't have enough time. Like, you're up in the morning and you're up at night. Now, I'm talking about an older dog that can be in a crate while you're at work or whatever,
Sure.
or until it's good enough. What do you think it takes? Very broad, it's not a softball question. It's kind of a curveball. How many minutes a day could you spend with a dog and modify behavior?
All right. And are you saying me or are you saying
You,
client?
you, yeah. Clients we know they're already messed up. We are,
Sure.
but like if I gave you a dog and said, boy, he's doing this, and let's say I could drop him off. You're not working with this dog 8 hours a day. Dogs don't
No.
have attention span. Are you doing it 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there? Do you have kind of a little pattern that works for you?
Sure. So I'll give you kind of my brief overview of what I'm doing with a rehab dog most of the time. Now, of course, keep in mind people are, paying me by the week for these types of things. So I'm trying to speed up, my online courses are much longer because I've formulated it so that it does fit into your daily life,
Right.
because there are time constraints that people have. And that's one thing I have to always, I tailor all of my training towards. It's not the exact way I would do it at home because I know the stuff like the back of my hand, but B, I have the time. If you're paying me to do it, I've got the time to really do it. So it's a little different than what I would encourage someone to do at home. But when I have a rehab dog, typically I'm doing the first thing that we'll do in the morning with a rehab dog usually is we're going to do some solid structured exercise. So usually that's going to be a really long walk. I love the walk for rehabilitating an anxious dog because it puts them in a very almost like a Zen state of mind, right? It's a very meditative type thing where it's just this monotonous, just walk, walk, walk. And it's a structured walk where they're not off sniffing. They have to be next to me. It's not like a super, super strict heel. It's just you got to be next to me and you got to be focused on walking, not focused on other things. Your nose can be kind of doing this a little bit back and forth, a little down to the ground occasionally.
Not pulling off to the side.
Not pulling. It's loose leash. You're next to me. You're focused. And I've done, depending on the dog, I'll do anywhere from, I usually aim for 45 minutes to an hour for a walk like that. For a rehab dog, I've done it before with more intense cases or more hyper cases where I've gone, 2 hours a day with that walk every morning. It just kind of depends on the dog. But typically 45 minutes to an hour is great. That sets the tone of the day of we're going to be focused, we're going to be controlled, we're going to be relaxed. And the dog comes home, gets fed, and usually takes a nap at that point, just relaxes for a good long while because they've done such a calm thing, but also a mental and physical exercise thing where they're ready to just chill. Then I'm going to intermittently throughout the day, pull them to do some exercises. So we're going to do, and this, by the way, the rehabs I've done so far, they're just in my home. So it's not in it's not a professional kennel environment. We're just, they're in a living room, they're in my kitchen. So this is a pretty normal environment for them. So, let's say it's a dog. Most of the dogs that I'll usually do, like I said, are the noise or people or whatever reactive where they run or hide or they try to fight when there's a stimulus. So say they're, reactive to a door, I'm going to maybe pull them for 30 minutes to do some doorway exercises, 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And then we'll go back to playing or relaxing, whatnot. And then I might take them out for an outing. We're going to go for 45 minutes and, go to the park and be near some kids that are playing or go to Petco and just walk around, not interact with people, just relax. We're going to do any sort of exercise like that. And then again, they'll relax again for a little bit. And then maybe, in the evening, we'll do another brief exercise of something. And then I am, depending on the day, throwing intermittently little sparse 2 5-minute, 4-minute exercises in throughout the day where, if it's a dog that freaks out when guests come over, I want there to be a knock occasionally when they're not expecting it. So I might just knock totally randomly on the door. And then we run through our exercise of helping them calm themselves back down, get into a place and let me open the door. So I would say in total, I'm probably spending, say an hour for the morning exercise and then maybe 2 chunks of, big training besides that vary from half an hour to an hour and a half. So let's call that a total of an hour and a half of like training during the day and then half an hour of miscellaneous stuff. So we're looking at, what is that, like 3 hours or so. So I'm probably spending between, depending on the dog, 3 to 4 hours a day, with that dog to really quickly modify that behavior. And like I said, most of the time those dogs will spend 3 weeks with me, 4 weeks with me, and then go back home and be a pretty different dog. When it's a client, I would say if you have an hour and a half, you can do 45 minutes of exercise in the morning and then some sort of thing in the afternoon, evening for 15 minutes at one chunk and then 30 minutes another chunk. You're going to make pretty quick progress. But most of the time, you can do a lot of this stuff as you're living your daily life. You just have to plan around it. So you're going to make a trip to, the grocery store and you're practicing separation anxiety. Just plan around that and make sure that you prep yourself where you can actually turn it into an exercise. Or maybe, you got to run to the store and pick something up and your dog is, doesn't do well with car rides. Well, great. Now's a car ride opportunity, right? So if you work it into your daily life, then, I always say like, do with your dog what you want to be able to do with your dog, basically, right? If you want to take your dog to the family gathering, take your dog to the family gathering. Just know that at first you're going to have to spend some time training at that family gathering, and eventually it'll become second nature. So most of the stuff, besides that first daily exercise type thing, a lot of this stuff can just be worked into your daily routine. And then if you have 2 or 3 training sessions during the week that are maybe 45 minutes long, you'll be able to make a lot of good progress.
Right. I listened to a fellow's podcast recently, and this was bird dog people that are doing this. And I've been thinking of doing this at our training grounds when it opens back up in April. They have set up obstacle courses, basically like the chutes and the ladders and the teeter-totters. Have you ever messed with anything like that with the dogs? I've heard that it's pretty good mental stimulation. It could kind of take the place of, let's say, for a bird dog, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm going to go run him for 20 minutes," it's you're exercising him, but he's got to think and he's got to maneuver and stuff. Have you dealt with any of that at all?
Yeah, agility is fantastic. I love agility work.
Agility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So agility is just so fun. And it's because of that exactly. It involves the mind and the body. So it's a physical exercise, it's a mental exercise, and it's a unifying exercise because you're the one guiding them through all of the different things. Agility can also be great for a dog that has a lot of energy but is nervous because they're interacting with a lot of different things. Typically in like an agility class, you're also going to have different dogs, different people. So if your dog is ready for it, but is typically more of a nervous dog, agility is a great way to teach them new things. The other thing too is you don't have to have all this, crazy professional equipment to start agility, especially if you have a smaller dog or a puppy. Get some basic things, get a hula hoop for them to walk through and eventually jump through, get, some sort of box or crate or something that they can jump on top of, and that can be their place / their jump on top of thing. You can get things for them to jump over, things for them to crawl under. So you can make agility equipment out of anything. And I've seen a lot of trainers who will they go to a park and they'll use whatever's at the park for their agility, right?
Right.
So agility is fantastic. I always refer to this thing called structured exercise, and structured for me is just it involves the brain and the body. So, to me, and essentially it's a job, right? It's got some sort of, it's got rules to it. It's led by you. You're working as a team, right? That's kind of a structured exercise. So yeah, agility is a great one.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. And like I said, I'm not going to try to make it look like a kid's park, but I haven't seen anybody do it. And it as soon as I heard it, I'm like, yeah, wouldn't that be cool to get this dog to go up and down little staircases and do a teeter-totter and go through a hoop? It'd have to make the dog feel, I mean, it's got to be a great stimulation for it. And you could do it with any dog.
Right. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and certain dogs, especially like I said, the higher drive dogs, and especially dogs that you always want to try to fulfill their breed related, characteristics and their inborn instincts. When you have like a herding dog, right? A lot of people have like cattle dogs. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of places to actually take your dog to herd recreationally, right? So
Right.
it's very hard to, go like corgis, herding dog, but it's very hard to find someone with sheep that's going to let your corgi
Right.
chase him around for an hour.
Right.
Not to mention it can be dirty, not to mention it, you know what I mean? All those different things. So
Yep.
agility is a great way to get a lot of those same, that agile nature of those dogs, right? That quick thinking nature. It's a great way to access that and get them to kind of burn off some of that steam without having to go super extreme and get yourself a flock of sheep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think my wife, if she doesn't listen to podcasts, but if she heard it, she'd probably say, okay, I want some stuff in the back. Because that dog could definitely use a job. More,
Right.
it's a good, this is our third corgi. It's the only one that I really fell for. I mean, he's pretty cool, but like terrible on a leash when there's a car going by. And I tell her, I said, well, don't walk on, my solution is don't walk on the road. We're on a sand road. We don't get a lot of traffic. But if that dog ever breaks his leash or his collar, she's going to lose that dog, right?
Right.
So she takes him for a walk out and back, and there's no stimulation. He's just an angel.
Right.
But he, at least, I mean, he comes when you call him, and he like that. That's a dog I think she would be happy even getting him. I was thinking maybe he'd go up the play school slide someday, for the little kids 3-step slide and back down again.
Yep.
You might turn that into it. I don't know.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Well, we covered aggression a bit, anxiety. Is there anything we wanted to cover that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure we?
Yeah, let's see here. I'm checking my notes that we'd kind of gone through a little bit. One of the things that we talked about that I remember was a specific interest of yours was medications, anxiety medications.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so you'd kind of asked me when we were initially chatting, you asked me my thoughts on anxiety medications. And I always give the disclaimer, I'm not a vet, so you have to talk to your vet about this stuff. You can't take my word for it. But I do have a unique perspective as a professional who works on the behavioral side of things, right? I see a lot of dogs that are on these medications, as well as a lot of dogs that are off these medications who have the same issues. And I have a few thoughts on medication. My first thing is that I don't think that they're necessary for most cases. At least the cases I've worked with, they're not usually necessary. And there's often a case where I'll come in, the dog's already on medication. I ask them, to talk to their vet and see if we can take the dog off medication. We work with it, and it vastly improves very, very quickly. The reason I usually go for let's take the dog off medication is I want to be working with the actual raw dog. Medication it's going to dull a lot of it's not going to remove the anxiety in almost any case that I've seen, but it is going to dull the reactions of the anxiety. You're going to see less manifestation of it. So the dog might still be feeling anxious, or maybe would typically react anxiously to this thing, and the anxiety is causing them not to. And that for me gives me a few issues. First issue is that I can't actually see what's going on in the dog's mind. So I'm not getting those cues that I need to really properly train the dog and really base, is this the right stimulus to be working with? Am I doing the right types of corrections? Am I doing the right types of rewards? Am I doing the right type of, everything, right? I can't gauge based off the dog's body language as well. It also, if you have a more aggressive dog, sometimes I have seen it where the medication dulls certain parts of the reaction, but not all of it. So you don't get the growl, but you still get the bite in essence, right? You get the more intense part of the reaction without as much of the warning. And I don't like that because obviously we want to know early
Right.
on if the dog's uncomfortable so that we can, recognize it and keep everybody safe, but also start there and help the dog learn to become comfortable. So that's another reason that that's why I'll often ask if we can take the dog off of anxiety medications at least for a bit while we're trying training, to see how it goes. And most of the time that's very successful. I think that, they also, it again, it masks the symptoms. It doesn't really solve the problem. And so for me, it's like, I would rather not band-aid a solution if I can totally fix the solution, right? Because even if it doesn't get worse, even if it just stays there, it's not really the ideal situation to just have your dog, and I have a lot of people who tell me they're like, I can't keep my medication because then he's just a bump on a log. And that's just sad. That's just depressing, right? It's like, I want my dog to be my dog, right? And so that can be, not fun, I guess, in that sense for the dog or for you. Also, I don't love the idea. I'd rather have the medication be used and be really effective when we really need it. So for example, it's a lot harder to practice things like a vet visit because you can't necessarily do that every day. You can't have a strange person in a strange environment. You have to think about the vet's office can be a very scary place. It's
Yeah.
got the smells of all these different dogs who have been scared and smelled scared in that area, right? You think about if you were to walk into a doctor's office, and this is kind of what your dog, sees based off of the reactions of the other dogs, the smells it's smelling. You were to walk into a doctor's office and you saw, like a bloody handprint on the wall. You heard screaming from patients in the background. Everybody was speaking some strange language and looking at you with these wide eyes. You'd be very freaked out. You would not want to get treated in that place, right? And so
Right.
your dog walks in, it smells all of these scents of dogs that have been afraid and expressed that through various, through urine and various scents. It hears a lot of dogs whining, yelping, barking, growling, things like that. It, usually the vet techs bless them, but they're often very over intense with the dogs where they use the high squeaky voice and they get all, yeah,
Right.
exactly. And so all of those things can be extremely scary. Then they get lifted up onto a metal table and some guy starts sticking his fingers everywhere, putting needles in them. It can be very scary. And the hard thing is those vet visits don't happen very frequently, so it can be hard for a dog to get used to them. So there are plenty of dogs where it can be nice to have a medication to give them for an event like a vet visit every 6 months to a year. And so I would rather save the medication and have it be extra effective when we really need it. And then for every other thing, train them really well with it. I have also here and there, I've seen dogs where because they've been on medications, calming medications like trazodone for so long, they become less sensitive to them. And that can be a concern too.
Right.
So you don't want it to lose its effect. If it has a good effect that you like and that helps the dog, I'd rather save that for when I really, really need it.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife does that with the corgi when it gets its nails done.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, I don't want to preach to her because she would tell me that I'm mansplaining to her, but she would have cut that dog's nails when it was a puppy and got it to lay flat on its back and fiddled with its feet and fiddled with its ears. It probably wouldn't worry about getting its toenails clipped. But all of a sudden you get now a dog gets pretty normal. He's a year and a half old. All of a sudden, like, boy, his nails are getting long. That dog needs tramadol when he gets his nails cut because he would bite you. I mean, he's that
Right.
afraid of somebody fiddling with his feet, and
Right.
pretty normal. So I agree, I would agree, like use it when you can, but never rely on it. Uh,
Right.
and then I want to touch too on noise. Now, in our genre, in our field, it's going to be gun sensitivity to noise.
Of course.
That could be, and I could be 100% wrong here. You could get a dog, what we call as a bulletproof dog. First time he hears a gunshot, it doesn't mean anything to this dog. Big deal, right? But
Right.
some dogs, first time to hear a gunshot or a firework, boy, you know, it can shut it down. And you're kind of like, my God, we were outside, we were doing everything you like. What was the big deal about the noise? Would you consider that a piece of anxiety, being afraid of loud noises?
Yeah, absolutely. There's dogs that are just more inherently confident, they're just less frazzled than other dogs, and like you're
Right,
talking about. And then
right,
there's dogs that just are more inherently just a little jumpy about the world. They're They're usually the one, if there's a group of puppies, they're the one kind of at the back. They're the one who's going to watch and see what happens to everybody else before they try something,
Right,
right?
right.
And so that's that kind of dog that you're talking about. You can also have a dog that is pretty confident generally, but the first time they heard a loud noise like that happened to, either, something they got hurt, maybe it was something fell and, pinched their paw or
Right.
something like that. They can associate it with a bad thing, right? So maybe they either had a bad exposure to a big bang first, or just they're a more jumpy dog. But typically the way that we'll go about that, um, I always try to focus on the first thing I'm going to try to do is lessen the stimulus as much as I can. So I might even use something like a clap first. I might just have just do a big loud clap. Something like that. I'm going to work up to things like I might take a couple of PVC pipes or something like that, smack them together. I'm going to slowly work up through sounds until I get to, usually the first thing that I use that's really a bang is I'll use like a firecracker or one of the small like a pop gun type thing or a blank or something like that. Firecrackers are great. You can start with the snap pops that they sell. You just throw them on the ground, it makes a little crack, and then
Yeah.
you can move up to a slightly bigger firecracker and then a slightly bigger one, and then you move into actual blanks and things like that, and then eventually to a shotgun. But what I'll usually do, I start by lessening the stimulus as much as possible, which also includes distance. So maybe it's just a friend doing a clap. And then you want to get that puppy involved in other things. They're playing, they're sniffing, anything where you can get them really focused. I'll use that same scatter feeding approach. I'll take either their kibble, or if they're really scared, I might take something extra yummy, little bits of chicken or freeze-dried liver or something like that. I'll scatter that into the grass. And as they're doing, as they're going for those things, I'm going to use that tiny little bit of stimulus, have it go off, and monitor them. If I see any reaction, then I'm going to stick with that level of stimulus until I don't see any reaction. And then we're going to slowly bring that thing closer and closer, or make the sound just slightly louder and louder until I get to the point where they're very confident around those sounds. But again, it's most of the time when I see people doing it, they're not starting with a small enough stimulus. They're still starting with something too big or too close that's
Right.
just too scary for the dog to handle. So start with something real small and get the dog doing something that is really fun, like really enjoyable, they can really focus on.
Yeah, one of our go-to place things is for dogs to introduce them to it is have them chasing a bird like a pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
They're so focused that, oh, maybe I can catch it, and the pigeon will never just come down on the grass, right?
Right.
And that's a pretty good way. But to your point, I think people start with too loud a noise, even when they're using a good stimulus for the dog, but it's still loud enough to make that dog just what was that?
Right.
So
Right. You want it to be so background at first that it's just not a concern. And I always like to test, if I don't know if a dog's going to be afraid of a noise, I'm going to test it with the smallest, tiniest noise first and
yeah,
slowly work my way up, because I don't want to start with something too big, scare it, and now it's hyper focused on that noise. Now it's starting to be trained to pay attention to that noise.
right, right. Well, unless we can all keep a trainer in our back pocket, I think what we've learned here, Alex, is baby steps, consistency, uh, don't rush it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take it as slow as you can possibly take it. And it's not rocket science, because you did not go to, MIT to do this, right?
Absolutely. And one last big thing that I would like to leave too, that's super important for working with an anxious dog, is your own, we haven't talked about too much, is your own mental, emotional state. I always say calm and confident. Usually the way I help people do that is I'll say, take a deep breath, bring your shoulders back, bring your head up, and you want to be totally relaxed and totally confident before you start engaging with that dog. And one of the ways that this often plays out is you'll have a dog that's barking excessively at the door or at the window. And I'll tell someone, you got to take a big, deep breath and relax and get confident. Then what I want you to do is I want you to read and then react. So you're going to watch the dog. And of course, this is a safe environment. The dog can't get to the person. Nothing bad is going to happen if you just leave it alone, right? I'm going to watch the dog and I'm going to wait for that moment where I can tell that the dog is wondering why I'm not reacting. That's when I'm going to step in. And that makes a big difference. But the biggest part of that is making sure that the person, you have to learn impulse control yourself, right? When your dog reacts or does something anxiously, if you jump straight in with your first thought, you're not going to be in a mindset where the dog can trust you, rely on you, and lean on your confidence. So you have to be totally relaxed, totally confident, and be able to pull yourself mentally in and out of that situation in order to be in the right frame of mind to help your dog. So that's the other big thing I like to leave people with, is that calm confidence.
Yeah, no, that I think, and that goes with everything you're doing with dog training. Because if people don't realize, they've heard it, how much a dog can read off you. And whether you call it reading, or if it's that dog that almost goes through the window when the mailman comes, right? And what do? Hey, hey, hey. Well, the dog's barking. And my owner's just as excited as I am.
Yep.
Yeah, he's on the same page I am, right? So you would just be like, walk up there calmly, and at some point in between the bark, maybe take him from the collar and go back to some other exercise in the room, to where he's like, oh, I don't get to do that. But I couldn't agree more. Keeping yourself calm, and you got to act like you've already been a dog trainer, even though you don't know how to be a dog trainer, if that's possible. You got to act like you've been in the end zone before. You got to be one bit smarter than the dog. So that's a tall order for a few people. I'm sure you've met them, but I'm sure you've had way more successes and people writing your Christmas cards and saying, thank you for what you did for my dog. I'm not embarrassed by him anymore. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's like, that makes it, I got into this originally because I wanted to help people with their dogs. I wanted to help unite people and dogs and make happy families. Basically, that's what motivated me, was the stress in my own family. I said, I don't want people to go through this. This sucks.
Yeah.
Let's make sure dog ownership is a fun, happy thing. So that's why I got into anxiety too. So.
Well, that's a deep subject. Alex, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. It's been a fun conversation. I know you said you had from 1 to 3, so I want to give you 10 minutes to get ready for whatever you're doing next. But I'll be in touch. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you, give it a plug, or whatever the best way to get a hold of you is.
Yeah, so you can check out my website, which is alexsdogtrainingprogram.com. You can also check me out on Instagram, Facebook. Those are all linked up to my website. But yeah, alexsdogtrainingprogram.com. You can also text or call 603-404-4649 to get a hold of me as well. I'll always do a free consultation with people. So if you've got a dog, you wonder if I can help you, reach out to me. We'll do a free consultation over the phone, and we'll talk about kind of your dog situation and make a bit of a game plan for you.
And that I would almost jump back at that. And that's like the first step of confidence, calling somebody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're also like, oh boy, always gonna answer. Hi, I got this. But the fact that you could reach out to somebody is a step in the right direction. If you're
right.
Because otherwise,
there's no shame in what you don't know. I always tell people, people act, it's weird. It's like dog training is one of those things. You don't get embarrassed when you have to call someone to come, fix the dishwasher. Because you don't know how to fix a dishwasher, right? But for some reason, when it comes to our dogs, we get all embarrassed. We're like, I've always owned dogs, but this one, I can't get it. I feel bad. It's like, no, you're not a dog trainer. You're not supposed to be a dog trainer. You're just an owner. So, you need a translator, and that's what I'm there for. So
exactly. All right. Well, you have a good one. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thanks again for reaching out.
Thanks so much. Great to chat with you, Ron.
All right. We'll see you.
Okay. Take care.
All right.